you know absolutely nothing about Tunisian crochet but you'd like to learn, you're in the right place. I'm Jess from Make a New Crew, and over the next few minutes I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know to get started with your very first Tunisian project. Tunisian doesn't need to be intimidating. I was scared to try it for years, and then I finally gave it a go and had it figured out in about 15 minutes. I think you might find it surprisingly easy too. So here's what you can plan on learning from this video. First, we're going to talk about why you might need a longer and larger hook than you're used to with typical crochet. But don't worry, today you can totally practice all the skills I'm teaching with a regular crochet hook. Then we'll learn how to work the first row of any Tunisian crochet project. Next, we'll cover how to work the Tunisian simple stitch, which is the most common Tunisian stitch. Lastly, we'll talk about how to bind off your project when you're finished. So let's get started. If you're anything like me, knowing that Tunisian requires a longer hook has maybe kept you from learning this crochet skill sooner. I know I was intimidated for years by the long hooks. But let me just tell you, if you've ever crocheted or knit, Tunisian does not have to be hard. And if this is your first adventure in any sort of yarn crafts, I really think that this is a very good entry-level skill to try. And the reason I say if you've ever crocheted or knit is because Tunisian crochet is sort of a hybrid of the two. Like typical crocheting, we'll be using one single hook instead of two needles, but like knitting, we'll be keeping our stitches on the hook for part of the process. In my opinion, Tunisian is a super relaxing and smooth blend of the things that I love most about each craft. So as I mentioned, for today's swatch, you can definitely just use a regular crochet hook, but I also wanted to cover why you might need a Tunisian hook for larger projects. Since the stitches stay on the hook for part of the Tunisian process, you need a hook that's long enough to accommodate the total number of stitches in your row. So for a narrow project like this, a short hook, a regular hook is totally fine. But for a longer project like a blanket or a scarf or something that has more stitches in your row, that's when you start to need a longer crochet hook. You've probably seen some long Tunisian hooks like this, and maybe even some crochet hooks with a removable cord like this. And both of these types of Tunisian hooks will work for a small to medium-sized project. If you just want to invest in one set of hooks though, my suggestion would be to purchase something like this with the cords. And the reason why I say a set like this is the most versatile thing if you're going to invest in only one set of hooks is because a kit like this comes with different lengths of cords. So then if you're making a shorter project, you can put a shorter cord on here, like maybe a scarf or something, and where the width only has to be this wide. But if you're making a blanket and you have a ton of stitches on there, then you can add a longer cord. So then whatever size project you're crocheting, you can accommodate it with the supplies in the kit instead of needing different lengths of hooks. And the other thing that I think is helpful about this type of hook with a cord is that I think it may result in a little less wrist strain because some of the weight of the project is often on this cord and therefore sitting on your lap versus needing to be on the hook the entire time if it's a solid metal or wood hook and need to be moved by your wrist with each stitch. So that's just something to keep in mind if wrist strain is an issue for you. So this set is made by Knitter's Pride. It's made of wood and I really, really like it. So I'll put a link to it right below this video in case you want to check it out. And there's two last tips I want to give you for when you're looking for the right hooks to use for Tunisian. One is that it's just going to be easier to work the stitches if the tip of your hook is a little bit pointier. So whether you're just making a swatch right now using regular crochet hooks or you're looking for maybe a set of Tunisian hooks, I would suggest opting for the ones that have a little bit pointier tip because it's going to make it easier to work under the bars of the stitches. So this is an example of one I wouldn't use because it's just going to be a little bit more frustrating. This one works great. The other thing to note about Tunisian crochet is that you'll want to go up in hook size from what you might use for a typical crochet project. Tunisian fabric can be on the dense side, so in order to let the stitches flow easily and the fabric drape well, you'll probably want to go up 2 to 3 hook sizes from what's listed on your yarn label. And of course, it's always worth swatching to see what's going to work best. But if you decide to buy a set of hooks, I'd go with a set that has the largest sizes possible because you won't likely get a lot of use out of the smaller hooks unless you work with very, very thin yarn. For this tutorial today, I'm going to be using a regular crochet hook. This is a size L, which is an 8mm hook. And then we're also going to be using Lion Brand's LB Collection Chainette yarn, which is a worsted weight category 4 yarn. Although I think it's definitely on the thicker side of worsted weight. So if you're using a different category 4 yarn, you might decide to use a smaller hook than this. The way that Tunisian crochet works, there's a forward pass and a return pass, and the combination of these two results in one single row of crocheting. So this might sound like a lot of work, but you'll see it's a very smooth, quick process once you get going. And because it's worked this way, you'll never turn your work like this. There's one right side of your project, and it will be facing you the entire time you're crocheting. So let's go ahead and learn how to begin a Tunisian crochet project. This foundation row we're about to practice is how most Tunisian projects start. So regardless of the stitch that you're working, you'll most of the time start it just like this. And we're going to begin with a slip knot. The way I like to make a slip knot is just to wrap the yarn around my hand like this. And then I have a loop and I pull the yarn through, and that makes a slip knot like this, and I tighten it down about to that size. So from here we're going to chain 11 stitches, and that's going to be the size of our swatch for this example. So to chain, I'm going to hold the yarn like this between my thumb and middle finger, and I'm going to grab the yarn over, and pull my yarn through. So that's completed one chain. Now we're going to do that 10 more times. So that's 2. I'm trying to keep my tension even here so that the chains are about the same size. This is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And instead of working into the front of the chain as we would with typical crochet, we're going to flip our chain over, and that reveals sort of a spine kind of going down the back, this row of bumps right here. So we're going to actually work underneath each one of those bumps, and instead of letting go of each stitch as we go, we're going to collect them all on our hook. So I'm going to skip the very first stitch as we would in typical crochet, and instead I'm going to work into the second bump. And I'm putting my hook underneath that bump. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull it under the bump and onto the hook. So now I have my first stitch, which was already on there, and then the second stitch, which was worked under the bump. So we're going to do that under each bump along the chain. Let's try it again. I'm working right under that strand of yarn so that I can yarn over and grab my yarn and pull it up. So now you can see we're just going to collect them right here, and this is our forward pass for a foundation row. So I've got 4 now. I'm going to go under that bump, yarn over, and pull my yarn through. So you can pause the video here and work under each bump, and then once we get to the end of the row, we'll talk about how to do our return pass. And once we've completed that forward pass now, it's a good idea to count your stitches and just make sure that you have the correct number here, that you grabbed every chain. I do have 11, so I'm ready to work my return pass. So we're going to work back this way to complete the row. And in order to do that, I'm going to yarn over and pull my yarn under only the first loop. So from now on, we're going to pull under 2 loops as we proceed this way, but a good way to think of this first stitch is it's like a chain 1 that you would work in typical crocheting to start your row, and its purpose is to elevate the yarn up so that the yarn is up high enough and can be worked back this direction. So whichever way of remembering it is most helpful to you, either that you chain 1 at the beginning of the row, or that you are just working through only the first loop and then every other loop it's 2 loops. So from here we've got that first loop taken care of. Now we're going to yarn over and pull under 2 loops at a time. And we're going to do that again, yarn over, pull under 2 loops at a time, yarn over and pull under 2 loops at a time. So you can see as we go here, we're letting go of loops, which is letting this hang free, and then it's starting to resemble a little bit more like typical crochet. So we are going to yarn over and pull under 2 loops, yarn over, pull under 2, yarn over, pull under 2, yarn over, pull under 2. And this is where I think Tunisian starts to feel really smooth, because this is a much faster movement than most typical crochet stitches. And I just love the ease of working it. So once we have 2 loops left on our hook like this, we're going to yarn over and pull through both of them. So now we're sort of back where we started with our chain, where we only have 1 loop on our hook and we've completed our return pass. So now we're ready to work our first row of whatever stitch we're going to do. And in this case, we're going to learn Tunisian simple stitch. And Tunisian simple stitch is such a good one to learn first because the skills that you need for this stitch are also used in most other Tunisian stitches. So this is by far the most common one, and you can make some amazing things knowing just this stitch. So from here, we're going to work a forward pass and a return pass. Basically, as we did here, we're just not working into a chain now. We're going to work into these stitches that we already created. And if you look at this, there's a certain spot that we're going to be placing our hook in each stitch, and it is this vertical bar that's going up from the last row. So it's here, 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 and we're going to be working our hook under each of those bars to collect our stitches again on our hook for the forward pass, and then we're going to drop them off again on the return pass. So let's try it out. To begin our first row of Tunisian simple stitch, we're not going to work under the very first bars here. That's our first stitch, and we're kind of thinking of it like this loop that's on our hook is our first stitch. So that one's already done, and now we're going to work under the next bar right here, so the second stitch. And I'm putting my hook underneath there, and I'm going to yarn over and pull my loop up to the height of the loop that was already on my hook. So that's our second stitch now is picked up. Now I'm going to work under that bar again and grab my yarn and pull it up. So now I have 3 loops on my hook, and we're just going to continue like that all the way down the row. So I'm grabbing my yarn, working under that bar, grabbing my yarn. Now, as you can see, even this motion is pretty smooth. So I find that Tunisian can be worked almost for a longer period of time because it doesn't require quite the same amount of movement in your hand. So if you have any wrist or arthritis issues with regular crochet, I think it's totally worth giving Tunisian a try and seeing if it uses slightly different muscles. So I'm almost finished with this row now. I'm going to work the last bar that we can see here. So that's my 10th stitch, and our last stitch is just a little bit different because the bar is right here, but instead of working just under the bar, we're actually going to work under both strands. So if you turn it sideways and you put your hook through, you can kind of see that you have both strands right here. And we just want that because that is going to make the edges a little bit tidier and a little bit straighter as our swatch grows. So under both bars there, I'm going to yarn over and pull up. And once again, I should have 11 stitches on my hook. So this is another great time to count and make sure you're on track. And now we're ready for our return pass. So this is going to be worked just as we worked the last return pass. So you're already basically a Tunisian expert at this point. We're going to begin by working under that first loop. So whether you think of it like just working under the first loop or chaining 1, we're going to begin like that. And now we're going to work under 2 loops the entire way across. So I'm going to yarn over, pull under 2, yarn over, pull under 2, under 2, and now we're back at the beginning of the row. We've completed our return pass, and you see it looks just like it did when we began the second row. So there's these extra spaces between each of our vertical bars, and that's because they need to get filled in with some stitches on our next forward pass. So let's try that one more time. I have this loop on my hook, so that's counting as our first stitch, and I'm going to skip my first vertical bar here. Then I'm going to work my hook under the next vertical bar, yarn over, pull up a loop, under the next vertical bar, and yarn over and pull up a loop. And that is all there is to the Tunisian simple stitch. It really is simple, isn't it? As promised. So go ahead and pause the video and work a couple more rows like this to practice, and then I'll show you how we bind off our swatch. Tunisian is a little bit like knitting in that you need to bind off at the end of your project. So instead of just cutting my yarn and fastening off here, we're going to work one last forward pass to fill in these gaps in between these vertical bars. So this is going to be worked, I'm going to show you how to do it for Tunisian simple stitch, but if you're working a different stitch, you would do the same thing, inserting your hook in the same way you have been for your stitch. So whatever that has looked like, you're going to insert your hook that way. Because we're doing Tunisian simple stitch, it's going to be working under these bars as we have been, just forward like that. So I'm not going to do anything in my first stitch because it's already on my hook, but I'm going to insert my hook under the next bar, yarn over, and then pull through both of my loops on the hook. So it's essentially a slip stitch that I just did, and that fastens off my first stitch right there. So now I'm going to work under the next bar, yarn over, and pull my yarn through the first loop and then the second loop on my hook. So that's another slip stitch. I'm going to go under that first bar, yarn over, and then pull my yarn through both loops on my hook, under the next bar, yarn over, and through both loops on my hook. So you can see that we're completing a series of slip stitches along the top here, and then the bottom underneath those slip stitches is filled in just like the rest of our rows of Tunisian simple stitch. So let's continue like that all the way across this row, and I'll show you what to do at our very last stitch. And now we can snip our yarn here, and then to fasten off entirely, I'm going to pull the tail that I just snipped through like this, and then we are officially done with our swatch. So your swatch probably looks a little something like this now. This is the front of your Tunisian simple stitch. The back looks like this with these beautiful bumps. And you might notice that it's curling a little bit. That's very typical with Tunisian. And there's a few ways to counteract that. I'm going to do a more in-depth video soon on how to tame that curl. But one of the best ways is just to simply block your project. So you would want to block it according to the yarn type that you're using. But one good way is often just to steam it. So that means to use the steam setting on your iron. You can pin the corners of your swatch down or whatever you're working on, and then use the steam setting on your iron to blow steam over the top, not too close, but over the top of your project. Of course, you don't want to actually touch the iron to the yarn because if it has any sort of acrylic component, it will melt your yarn. So start up higher, the further away the better, and then test to make sure that you don't, it's called killing your yarn by getting too close and getting the yarn too hot. So blocking will help a lot with the curl, and then stay tuned for another tutorial on some other techniques that you can use while you're working the foundation row of your project to tame that curl a little bit more. I really hope you're excited to experiment with some more Tunisian crochet projects. If so, sign up for my weekly emails because I'll be sending out some free crochet patterns using these basic Tunisian skills that we just learned that are going to be released in the coming weeks. And if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crocheting!